everybody. Привет всем. Welcome back to our second podcast of the Ruski Zarubezhye, otherwise known as
Rush Czar, not as in TSAR or as in drug czar or border czar, but Zarubezhye.
There you go, like that. So Rus Czar. With the first podcast we did on Maslenitsa, and this, Yura, what are we going to be talking about this podcast?
Well, right now we have Veliki Post, right? So we have the fun Shrovetide, Maslenitsa, and now it's time to focus inwardly. And that's why we're going to talk to Otец Andrei Papkov. Andrei Papkov.
Yeah, he's a good childhood friend from my Nyack years when I was growing up there, right? So we were both прислужники. And, I gave him that call to see if he would be interested in talking about Great Lent, Veliki Post, and Торжество Православия. And of course, he's known for his voice, he's got that strong voice. And memories of growing up, going to Jordanville, and hearing him saying the special Malebin Anathema.
Right, the pronunciation of the Anathema. I personally have always remembered Otец Andrei for being the Litopisец in the Millennium Celebration of Christianity that we did in Queens College back in 1988. His voice is very memorable, and it's a very big pleasure to talk to him. Before we get to that, though, I do want to discuss an interesting Ruski Zarubezhny newspaper that we still have. It's called Ruskaya Жизнь. They are not sponsoring us, but this is a paper that was by and about the Ruskaya Zarubezhye. It was published initially in 1921, so it is over 100 years old. And there is a very interesting article in this specific edition that was published mid-February. Still in print, by the way. Please do subscribe. They have both a digital and a print edition. And we will take a look here and see that, I'm trying to find it, here we are, this nice color spread. There's a wonderful ball in St. Petersburg, Florida, and Kato is right there in the tuxedo. Maybe Kato, you can tell us a little bit about the ball and Russian Heritage, which is the organization that you had down there.
Yura, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm Kato Hichinov. I am the president of Russian Heritage organization, which is based here in St. Petersburg and has been around for 30 years, which means in January 2026 we'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary at our Russian Heritage Winter Ball. Every year it's been growing more and more and more, and we have interesting celebrities, VIP status, politicians joining us. So if anyone ever decides to come down here and say, well, I'll be letting people know where to order the tickets. And we have people coming down from New York, and we have people coming in from California. So vacation time, right, pre-spring break or after New Year's, why not come down here and have some sun and fun?
Absolutely, totally agreed. So let's switch gears back to Veliki Post, and now we're going to roll video of our discussion with Otец Andrei Papkov.
You were born in Germany and in Europe, and along with your family, you migrated to the States. Perhaps you might want to share a little bit about this history about your parents, especially about your father. I think it's very important. We used to call him Dядя Коля. I did not call a lot of people by the имя отчество. It almost did not exist as when I was a young kid, right? But nevertheless, your father was a very interesting man, very, 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 он очень спокойный был. Очень спокойный, right? He was very easygoing, down to earth, and seemed like he would never even harm a fly. He was iconopisец, or in English, iconographer, right? Could you bring up a little bit about that, about your history?
My father ended up in the West after the war, namely in Germany, because he was a POW. That's where he met Father Serafim and also my godfather in the POW camp in Kaunas, Lithuania. And
that's Otец Serafim Slobodskoy.
Yeah, and when Of course, they were next to death all the time. It was a very dangerous time, very dangerous era, and the three friends, Отец Serafim Slobodskoy, or at that time Serafim Alexeyevich, and my father, and my godfather, Andrei Alexandrovich Rostovtsev. And they made a promise to God that if they would survive the hell in which they were immersed, that they would build a church when they got to be free. So, and they did so, and the Nyack Church is the fulfillment of that promise. The thing
Promise.
is, Father Serafim was the rector of the church, and he also, he built it, and
Yes.
and he painted a lot of icons. My father did the frescoes,
The
and
fresco.
and my godfather designed the iconostas, that nice golden iconostas.
Yes.
It's all my godfather's design. So
Wow.
and they were grouped together as the three artists. So
We're talking about late 1950s, correct? If I remember, it was 1956 somewhere there that the church was constructed, right? Probably
well,
some.
I think the cornerstone, I think, says 1955. When we came to America in 1956, I remember the first Pakrov that I went to, and the walls were up, but there was no ceiling. The
Uh-huh.
ceiling was a blue sky, and Vladika Nikan served then, and Tетя Tsenka's father, the Elizaveta Mikhailovna Veter, her father,
Yes, of course.
Mikhal Mikhailovich, was the choir conductor, and and that's all I remember. I mean,
Sure, sure. It's
I, I
understood.
was I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah, it's
So
understood.
yeah, those
Well,
memories.
your father definitely was one. He did all the frescoes, all the icone. I remember again, beautiful. I grew up in that church. In reality, though I was born in New York City, but at an early childhood, we ended up moving to Nyack Valley Cottage area, and so I saw that church every Bogoslužение. Beautiful, beautiful work, beautiful work.
Yeah, the thing is, they called my father an iconographer, but actually he was not an iconographer per se. He was what they call in Russian "свободный художник." I mean,
Wow.
he had his degree in in uh, in art. I mean, he could do anything.
Wow.
I mean, that in Novodeveva, for example, he did the iconostas.
Wow.
Uh, I remember he painted those icons on canvas back in Munich, then rolled them up and sent them to America. And then he did all of the carvings of the iconostas. Everything that is carved there was done by him. He also made the chandelier, and the first Nyack chandelier, which
Sure, I
they
remember to this day. I remember it was a big circle with the four position icons on each side, right?
yeah, he made it, and I lost all track of it. I wanted to bring it to Chicago to put it up, because at that time we didn't have a
A
lustra
chandelier.
in the Chicago church. But the thing is, I'm surprised that nobody seemed to remember where it went.
Interesting.
And later, it was replaced by some contemporary Greek chandelier, which doesn't do the church any justice. So,
Absolutely with you there. I
so
think
my,
that change happened somewhere early '90s because that's when I was living overseas already in Moscow, and it was at that time that it changed.
yeah. Well, my father was my father was an artist. To say that he was an iconographer would really narrow things down a lot. I mean, he could do sculpture, he could do a lot of things. So,
Bless his
so
heart.
yeah, so you know, he could do portraits, landscapes, whatever,
Sure,
whatever you want. I think there is a list. After he passed away, my mother, in 2 issues of Pravoslavny Put, that is a little monthly magazine that came out, she made a list of the churches that he worked for, and he worked for all jurisdictions, for the OCA, for painted for the OCA, for the Greeks. Actually, it just goes on and on. The list is very comprehensive.
Attention today. Attention today. I just wanted to ask you. This is interesting because your parents, both of your parents, if I understand correctly, are from what we term the Vtoraya immigraция. And I'm kind of mixed. I have mostly Первая immigraция, but I also have my babushka who's from Vtorая immigraция. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit. What do you feel define both of those immigracji? How do you feel like, as somebody, because we're all kind of mixed here, of course. So maybe you can just share your thoughts on that.
Well, they were both the common denominator between the two immigracji, with a slight variation, were that they were both pravoslavny immigracji, Orthodox immigracji. That's why you had a big building boom back in the 50s and the 60s of churches. The thing is, of course, the second immigration, for the most part, grew up in the Soviet conditions, and they didn't get the same church upbringing that the first immigracja got. But there were a lot of Orthodox people in the second immigration, and a lot of clergy that came out in the second immigration, who all served in the Moscow Patriarch at the time. For example, Отец Adrian, who everybody revered in the Vaziveva, very little people realize that he served from the 20s and the 30s in the Moscow Patriarchate, which everybody kind of poo-pooed here, saying they were KGBs and so forth. And there were a lot of people like that. Half of our synod, as a matter of fact, came from that environment. For example, the bishops from Belarusia and Ukraine, like Vladika Leonti, Vladika Panteleimon, Vladika, there was a lot of them. So, and they all served in the Patriarchate, and nobody ever said that they were without any grace. That was Graba's politics later on. Unfortunately, it worked out that way. I don't want to get into that because that's a very sore issue. So,
but it's interesting that you mentioned that it specifically concerns the clergy, because in my case, my grandmother, her mother was very religious. She grew up, without her father. Unfortunately, he perished because of the difficult conditions at the time as a young man. But my great grandmother was a very religious and pious person, and my grandmother, had a hard time because she was being raised in the Soviet system, and with Stalin. And it was only when she finally ended up with meeting my grandfather, who was in the, was from the Первая immigraция, the Белая immigraция, that, she really was able to freely practice Orthodoxy. And then, so it's very interesting when we already made it abroad. That's where we actually were able to, a lot of people from the Vtoraya immigracja were able to freely practice Orthodoxy. But it's interesting that there were clergy too from there. I wasn't even aware to the extent that was there.
Yeah, for example, the synodal Отец Gelassi from Synod was a monk in Kiev, and it just went on and on. And anyway, my father, although he was in the second immigration, he came from my grandfather was a priest during the. He died back in 1938. So and he spent a lot of time in jail, you know, in the Kamera Smertikov. He was condemned to be shot, and then finally, when he became a wreck, they let him go home just to die. And my father could tell a lot about the life there with the faithful people. Yeah. So, and my father started his schooling. I mean, my father was born during the Tsar's times in 1906. So he started his education in the Dukhovное училище. His older brothers all graduated seminary. At least one got thrown out of seminary за хулиганство, but then the commies shot him anyway, because he was a white officer, yeah, and then his second and third brother, they were all doctors, and guess what came in very handy? The Latin that they learned in seminary,
Wow.
and yeah, and they were both MASH doctors на фронте, фронтовые хирурги были. It was times were not simple,
Yeah.
to say the least. So and then my mother remembered that of all places, she lived in what is now Ukraine, and she remembers visiting church on Easter when the Germans came and occupied Donbass, because she was living on Donbass in the city of Makiyivka. Yeah.
Wow.
So and they had clergy living there, renting rooms from my grandmother and that sort of thing. And it was a religious family. I would not call them typical Soviet products.
Yeah, well, that was a changing, right? That was a changing situation, right? As revolution kicked in, and the times were changing. Out in the villages, it was still, they were trying to keep Orthodoxy alive, right? But каждая судьба появилась, right? Everyone had their own future destiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that the Russian people were religious by nature. Both immigrations, first and second. The third one is a different story.
I grew up on Riverside Drive, Broadway, in Hamilton Heights with Yura, Yura's father. That was a Russian community in Hamilton Heights on Broadway, 141st Street and Broadway, in that area.
That's where my godfather lived, on the corner of Broadway and 141st.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. And that's was one of the first places that we came to in America when we came here.
Well, today that's where I was. Well, I was born in a woman's hospital, which was later turned into a Con Edison building, but that was my childhood for the first 3 years of my life. Yeah.
And my father spent most of his young years there, essentially. Yeah. So, do you have any memories from then? From visiting there?
Oh yes, plenty. We used to go to his house every imenina that he had, and there were a lot of Russians in the house where he lived.
Yeah, that's why it was called Ruski Dom. It was called the Ruski Dom. I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where he lived, on the second floor.
Wow. On the second floor. We were on the fifth.
My dad was on the fourth, and his was on the fifth.
Small world.
I remember Четыре континента, of course, and that became the Kamkin store. Yeah,
it was down further south, right? No, there was a Vasilyev store on the corner, but not under our house. next door, the street, the other side, the corner of our street. It's
There
called.
was some kind of grocery store that belonged to Mr. Balaklitska, I understand.
Wow.
And then when he would sell bread, which he used to get from Magapak, anyway.
Is that
So
right?
and customer
One.
and it was called Monastirski Хлеб, and the
Yeah.
customer and the customers would ask какой юрисдикции. Yeah.
That's great. Love that. Beautiful memory.
So I was just say, you basically, so you grew up around the Nyack area, and
When we first came here, when we first came to America, we came to Novodiveevo because they sent my father a contract to paint their church, and our first residence was in Novodiveevo. So from age 5 to about age 8, I lived there while my father was working, and I just heard Russian around me all the time. And I only moved to America, like I said, when we moved to Nyack, and that's when I started playing with the kids in the street and picked up English. Before that, no. I mean, it was just.
I'm
It was,
wondering, it's Andrei, did you graduate Nyack High School by any chance? No?
yes, I did.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so we understand. Beautiful school, nice memories of that, right? Okay, well, that's wonderful. It's Andrei. That is actually beautiful, and thank you for sharing. And we're going to have, Yura, we're going to have a discussion about 141st and Broadway, right? Something
absolutely,
we're gonna definitely develop it, create it. We've got some ideas. Отец Andrei, Great Lent, Великий Post, right? We're at it right now.
Yes.
What could you explain to us as the novice, the typical русский зарубежник, right? That we are. What is Великий Post? What is Great Lent? What should it be, or what's your memory of?
It should be a time of great self-reflection and concentration on spiritual matters. The thing is, for a lot of people, mistakenly, Великий Post is just a dietary season. You don't eat meat, you don't eat dairy products or eggs, that sort of thing. But
Right.
in order to answer that question, there is a good stichira on the first week of Lent. Let me just read it to you. Here, it's on Monday of Great Lent. It says, «Постимся постом приятным, благоугодным Господу». Истинный пост есть. Что такое пост? Злых отчуждения, то есть всего злого отрицания, воздержание языка, ярости отложения, то есть, no aggression type of thing. Похоти отлучения, so you have to forget your скотинность. Оглаголание и лжи и клятвы преступления. Сих оскудение, пост истинный есть и благоприятный. That's the essence of post.
The essence.
And it's a lot easier not to. Well, why do people concentrate on the dietary thing? Because it's a lot easier.
It's easier. It's around us, and being as kids growing up growing up, I was 5 years old. I perhaps did not understand so much about the spiritual side, but the parents made sure that мы будем все равно поститься. No doubt, there's no questions asked, right? Post, Великий Post, 40 days of being a vegetarian, which is a lot easier today. There's a whole bunch of vegetarians, right? They've got an easy way out. What do they? What actually? What? Right. So what do the vegetarians do in this case? Right? Они уже постятся, right? So what should they do out of the blue? Besides, they should be focused on the prayer, right? They should be focused just exactly what you read.
Exactly. The thing is that in Булгаков's book, его настольная книга для священнослужителя, where they have a list of all the heresies. One of them is, would you believe, vegetarianцы. Why? Because I think, because it applies to those vegetarians who don't eat certain types of food, which is a gift of God, from God to people. They consider it to be impure. Они брезгуют. You know, they're very squeamish, you know, for God's gifts. For them, God's gifts are dirty. It's not good enough. And that's why they're in that list.
Wow.
So that's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a moment that I'm sorry, I don't mean this in a terrible way. I don't know who the starushka was. I don't remember. Was it Baba Tesia? You remember Baba Tesia, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I I'm not too sure. I think it was her. I moved to Moscow in 1992, and 1993 other Ruskies Зарубежные started moving there, considering moving there. They're always curious. And on one of our trips back to United States for Pascha, I think it was actually for Pascha, me and Vitya Pitalyev came back from Moscow. I think it was 92, 93, somewhere there. And Baba Tesia, if it was her, for some reason I'm thinking it's her. She says, Vitya, а ты посишься там в России? And Vita goes, Баба Теся, то, что я живу уже в России, это уже считай пост. I'm just joking. I mean,
Well, this is the 90s, of course.
the
so it's a little
90s,
bit-
right? The fact that, living there we don't have all the luxuries of everything. And although it's also, there's a clause in it, I believe, I might be wrong here. Is there such a clause that if you're traveling, you have the right to put post aside?
Well, it's not a written rule. A lot of times, you know, there's very little to go on, and so some priests say, okay, post можно ослабить,
Okay.
you know, but
Right.
not to any great extent.
Sure, it's understood.
Assistant today, here's the thing. A lot of people, I hear two sides, right? One side says, fasting, is mostly, and I totally would agree, right, with what you said, with what you read, that fasting is the spiritual first and foremost. But some people also use that as a way to dismiss the physical fasting with the food. They say, well, it's better to have a chocolate cake and be nice to everybody than, So obviously the food does have a role. I mean, it's not by chance that these dietary restrictions are suggested by the church, right? I mean, would you say?
Well, they're there for a purpose. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, being that this is, and I personally see nothing wrong with, trying to be culinarily creative at this time of year too. And I don't know, what's your favorite postное, traditional Russian postное блюдо that you enjoy?
Пироги с капустой.
Totally with you.
Well, there you go.
Number one. For me, that's number one. I totally agree. I remember we mentioned grechka too, right? You like that?
Yeah. I even started, when I was still healthy, I started cooking, I got on a cooking kick, and in the Приходской stock, they even published an article, a recipe. It's called Гречка по-протерейски. Yeah.
Well, maybe you'll be kind enough to give us the recipe later. That would be an interesting thing to try to cook.
Well,
Well, yeah. And it's pretty easy. So it's with sauteed onions and sauteed mushrooms and carrots. You know, нужно настругать морковки, нужно и
sure.
тоже можно поджарить, и потом все это смешать.
Smishat.
Yeah,
Well, I grew up with no doubt about it. Kapusta was always uh, part of uh, Lent, во время поста. But I definitely have a great memory of eating kvashena kapusta. And kvashena kapusta, kisla kapusta, what a sauerkraut, whichever way you want to think of it, right? But back then, when I tried to make it more in recent times, now that I'm back in the States, I can't make it to the way my grandmother used to make it, or to like Ivan Ilyich, bless his memory, uh, Ivan Ilyich, who used to make kvashna kapusta for us every year. It was an old man, uh, man of of earth, and he used his hands to do everything. He was just wonderful. He did wonderful uh, things with with his hands, and so on даже сколотил, he made a barrel, not a large one, not a small one, but a mid-sized barrel out of, I don't know, from wood from the trees from outside. I don't know where he got it, but he made the metal band, and every year he would make kvashna kapusta for us. Well, and for himself, because he lived in a room on Tolstoy Farm. He didn't have all the luxury of living in a big place, so he trusted us that no one's going to be touching this barrel of kapusta in our basement. And so kvashna kapusta, it was very simple: cabbage, carrots, um, salt, sugar. That's it. And it would stay. He would have it open for the first couple of days, open so that the fermentation process began, and eventually, right, he would close it down, and we would have kvashna kapusta all. And I never got sick of it, and I'm not sick of it even today. I enjoy kvashna kapusta tremendously. It goes everywhere as a salad, as an appetizer. You could put it into blinchiki, you could put it into vareniki, you could marinate it, you could cook it, put it into shi, borscht, wherever you want. It's a wonderful and a healthy product.
yeah.
We just went through our first неделя Великого Поста, and there is the Торжество Православия. And as we had previously discussed, there's just the regular, liturgy. I think it's Vasilia Velikova, right, that we serve during Post,
Of
which is
course.
served, which is served on the Sunday in most parishes. But if you're in a service with a bishop, there's a special moleben, which you have traditionally, when you were a deacon, you used to take a big part in that by singing the anathemas. And to me, it always struck that this was a very striking service. Kind of reminds me of the last act of Don Giovanni, where the Commendatore takes Don Giovanni to the netherworld. Where all of these heresies and heretics are described. So maybe you could talk to us about what is that service really about? Why does it have such a scary feeling, and what really is the church trying to tell us with this?
Well, to begin with, the church is viewed as an institution in which people are saved, save their souls, symbolically like a ship, like a kovcheg of sorts. You stay on the ship and you avoid all of the dangers of the sea. And then you put yourself outside the church by believing certain ways. You know, if you follow certain teachings, for example, Spiritism and other non-Christian followings, and by that you put yourself outside the church. So the word anathema literally means separation or отлучение. So the thing is, this moleben can be served anywhere, actually, but the anathemas are pronounced only with a bishop present. So first there's the Великая Ксения, Тропари, Apostle, Evangelia, then the presiding cleric reads a special prayer, asking God's intervention for people to find the right way, and then the anathemas are read, not personalized, but naming different heresies, таким-то, 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 там, хулителям православной веры, all the atheists who kind of poo-poo on religion, or нечестивым отступникам, поднявшим руки на помазанника Божия, type of thing. Yeah, that's all very real, and it applies to a great extent to the communist regimes.
Yeah.
And then there's about a dozen of these anathemas in groups, but dishonorable mention, so to speak, by heresy. Moving along, then occasionally, if circumstances call for it, they do personalized anathema. For example, in the early 70s, I think, or late 60s, they did a personalized anathema to Lenin. During Tsarist times, they did personalized anathemas to like Leo Tolstoy for his heresies,
Sure.
which were widely published.
Sure.
And then to people like Stenka Razin, Emelka Pugachev, or Dmitry Samozvanets. They were named personally, anathema.
Yeah.
So that was basically the gist.
My go ahead.
And the before I did that, it was always done at Jordanville by Отец Pimen Archidiakon, and then I guess Father Joseph stepped in because Отец Pimen died 1971. And when I moved to Jordanville, when I became a deacon, quite by accident, Father Joseph wasn't there. The monastery deacon cracked up the monastery truck. He was not available at that time. And Vladika Averki asked me, because I came to Jordanville just for the weekend, just to be there. And he called me in and he said, "Ты можешь это сделать? У нас сейчас диакона такого нету."
Wow.
All right. Yeah, and that's how I stepped into the job. And then when I did it, Father Joseph and I started taking turns, and some years I did it several years in a row. And that was sort of like spiritual Disneyland,
Well, exactly. It's Andrei perfectly said. That was a spiritual Disneyland. It was. That's how I remember my паломничество every year for Торжество Православия, and you or Отец Иосиф Yerashchuk used to carry. But I remember you. I mean, I personally, I think you had a very strong voice. You still do. I mean, we hear this, but it was nice to see that I was connected to you. I remember you from Nog, and now you're in Jordanville, and I think maybe that was a connection. But you made it so. You brought us our souls. So, I don't know. Ты внесся прямо в сердце, когда ты разглавлял Anathema. I mean, it's strong, and I still remember it to this day.
Yeah, it was something to do. Like I mentioned the other time, one of my fondest memories of anathemas was when my son, who's now 30 years ago, my son is now 37, and he was 7. At that time, he was 7. He was a little altar boy holding the posach for the calaver, and I'm standing there up on the ambon by the icon of Christ, facing the bishop, and they're all singing anathema, anathema, and then all of a sudden, this voice pipes up through all the monks' voices, anathia, 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 and I looked there at him, and I said, "What's wrong with this picture?" Then I looked at the Likalaur who's standing next to him on the cathedra, and the Likalaur is cracking up. He's in stitches. Yeah.
Wonderful memory.
And I think that particular anathema, I think Zhenya Kalaur, has on his site. If you listen carefully enough, you could probably hear it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, definitely not we do have access to a recording where you're singing, where you're doing the Pravozglashanya, so we'll definitely feature that for everybody to hear what that sounded like. Yeah, amazing.
That was in Moscow, in the small concert hall of the conservatory, which we did in the middle of the night because the streetcars didn't rumble by at 1 o'clock in the morning. It had to be silent.
Попирающим святыни, разрушающим храмы Божия, истязующим братью нашу и осквернившим Отечество наше,
Well, I remember those trips from Nyack, from our Russian church school on Saturdays, right? Palomnichestvo every year. And if it was Otец Yosef Yeroshuk, if it wasn't him, it was you. And those were wonderful memories. You brought the spiritualness to our hearts. And you still do, per se. I mean, you're a wonderful man for those wonderful memories of you.
Well, it's today. This has been a very good conversation. I'm really hoping that you'll be back and we'll be able to talk to you some more. There's a lot to talk about. You know a lot about Rokor history and about our emigration, so that's exactly what our project's about, and hopefully you'll be back to talk to us some more.
God willing.
Yeah.
Если буду жив и здоров, буду рад.
Если мы тоже будем, надеюсь, живы и здоровы.
Я тоже надеюсь, что я буду здоров и жив. I mean, I'm down here in Florida. The sun is baking, and I'm not getting any younger.
That was a very lovely discussion. I like the fact that Отец Andrei discussed the emigration specifically too, the вторая emigration, and maybe we'll even elaborate on that at some point, the difference between the первая and the вторая emigration, which
I think he's going to join us once again. I think that
absolutely.
we got that little synergy working with him. So
yeah, absolutely. So we got more coming. We're going to be talking about Russians in New York. We're going to be talking about food. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. But you have to, in order to enjoy that, what do people have to do?
Yeah, we want you guys to enjoy us, but please subscribe, hit the like buttons, and share some comments. Write to us.
Absolutely. This is a discussion, so we're trying to learn about things that we don't know either. We're trying to kind of fit the pieces of the puzzle together. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to all learn together, essentially.
Awesome.
All right, so see you next time.
Take care, everybody. До скорой встречи.